importing a lot of cloud, some outbreaks of rain as well, especially in the west and the far north, and it is staying on the mild side. These weather fronts providing a focus for the rain and the isobars tightening through the evening across northern Scotland in particular. Gales for the far north, with Shetland likely to see 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts as well as some outbreaks of rain for a time. The rain most persistent for northern Scotland. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud, some dribs and drabs of rain across western hills and coasts, but a mild night to come for all of us, with temperatures up at 10 to 13 Celsius as we start off Friday. A cloudy start once again, some breaks in the cloud emerging across central and eastern and perhaps northern parts of England as well. So for some, it's a brighter day, a better chance of some sunshine perhaps for Northern Ireland, northeast Scotland, and another very mild day, 16 Celsius once again possible in the east of Scotland, 13s and 14s elsewhere. But we keep that persistent wet weather in the far north of Scotland. We keep that strong wind going, especially around northern hills. The wet weather in the far north of Scotland ebbs and flows, I think, through Friday night, but it is slowly edging southwards. That's going to bring about a change through the weekend. But Friday night, it's more of the same. A lot of cloud, staying mild with temperatures at around the daytime average for the time of year through the night, so 8s to 10s by and large. And we start off with that on Saturday. For many, it's a dry start, but a lot of cloud, and again, some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle in western hills and coasts. But it's across northern Scotland where it's a wet start to the day. That rain then pushes into central and southern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland by the afternoon, eventually arriving into northern England and North Wales by the evening. Skies brighten behind the rain, so a better chance of some sunshine, albeit with a few showers on Sunday, and feeling much colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. It's 8 o'clock, you know that. On Brazier tonight, Albania will reportedly charge Britain £100,000 to process asylum seekers who cross the Channel. Is that a price worth paying? Also, police officers must now ask themselves 44 questions before they handcuff someone. A former detective tells me that's mad. But if it stops racial profiling, is that a price worth paying? And don't switch over. The latest blockbuster interview with Meghan Markle is being broadcast right now in America. We've watched it in advance, so you don't have to. All that's coming up. But first, the news with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Good evening. The Prime Minister has said it's total rubbish to suggest that the idea of levelling up Britain is being derailed by plans to scrap the eastern leg of HS2. Original plans had included a high-speed rail line from the East Midlands to Leeds, but the line has since been scaled back as part of the government's newly unveiled £96 billion integrated rail plan. However, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused Boris Johnson of having let down everybody in the north. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says Leeds will eventually be connected to HS2.
Bradford's been betrayed and the north of England have been betrayed because the Prime Minister made two very important promises.
Those extra high-speed lines take decades and they don't deliver the commuter benefits that I'm talking about.
In other news, a public inquiry is going to be held following the death of Dawn Sturgis, who was poisoned by Novichok in Salisbury in 2018. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has granted permission to convert the inquest into a public inquiry to better examine any possible Russian involvement. Ms Sturgis died after the substance was used in an attempt to poison the former Russian spy. Cricketer Azim Rafiq has apologised and says he's ashamed for using anti-Semitic language in a message that's been unearthed from 10 years ago. It comes after the Times newspaper uncovered an exchange in which Mr Rafiq is seen to make disparaging comments about an unnamed Jewish person. The former Yorkshire County player has been giving evidence at a Commons Select Committee this week on the racism he experienced at the club. Germany is poised to introduce tough new COVID restrictions on those who are unvaccinated after a rise in cases. The Chancellor, Angela Merkel, has said that a fourth wave of COVID is hitting the country with full force. German MPs have voted in favour of a new set of measures, including limited access to public transport for people who are unvaccinated. The nation's upper house of Parliament will consider the new restrictions on Friday. And lastly, ahead of the Beijing Winter Olympics next year, China may have a new star in the making. Take a look. Videos of the snowboarding baby have gone viral across the world. Her parents apparently went on holiday skiing and wanted to include her in the fun. There she is. She's 11 months old with skills like these. Little Wang Yuji, despite the wipeout, could be set for stardom. You're right up to date. I'm back in an hour. Now here's Brazier.
Snowboarding babies, beat that. Here we go. On average, there are about 2,000 crimes committed in London every day, and some of them require officers to use handcuffs. But after a review prompted by accusations of racism, constables must now think a lot harder before they slap on the cuffs. Believe it or not, officers must now ask 44 questions of themselves about whether it's necessary to restrain someone with handcuffs. The list of questions emerged today as part of a new 25-page-long manual for arrest published by Scotland Yard. Here are the first 4 of the 44 questions to give you a flavour of what's expected of arresting officers. Is what I am considering consistent with the Code of Ethics? What would the victim or community affected expect of me in this situation? What does the police service expect of me in this situation? Is this action or decision likely to reflect positively on my professionalism and policing generally? And so it goes on and on. 44 questions you need to put to yourself. Well, if you're an officer, how easy is it to consider all of this in the heat of the moment of an arrest? Might you actually only have a split second to protect yourself and the public from harm? How can anyone consider 44 questions as they, for instance, give chase to a suspect? Is this a case of sensitivity around race getting in the way of effective public protection? Let's turn to Kevin Hurley, a former senior officer with the Metropolitan Police. Kevin Hurley, thanks for your time. What do you make of this?
Well, frankly, it's an example of the ineptitude, the pusillanimous, the weakness decision-making that we now see with senior police leadership. Police officers, when they decide to use force or apply handcuffs, need to run through in their mind a lot of different things, which basically comes down to is this the right thing I'm doing? Can I defend my options? What we've now seen happen is something that's going to affect 3 groups of people. First, it is going to put off the cops using force or arresting people. And let me tell you this, there is nothing more difficult than trying to get some police officers to deal with confrontation. It's very easy to back down. The hard thing is to motivate a police officer to be nosy. The second thing is the public are going to think, what on earth is going on here? And the third point really is that for those who are ne'er-do-wells, baddies, it's going to give them an opportunity for an outer, because what will happen now is after an officer in the dark has confronted someone in an alleyway, as you rightly say, in a split second has had to fight them to the ground and apply handcuffs. Slowly, over the next couple of years, they will be judged in an investigation by the Independent Office of Police Conduct to see, did they answer all of those 44 questions in the pouring rain, rolling about in the dog excrement with a really violent man. But what it will do is spread the message through the police, getting involved, getting stuck in, being nosy is not worth it. And we are seeing that already. The fact of the matter is, looking at the race issue, we are now about to overtake the record number of teenage deaths in 2008 of 29 teenage kids murdered in London. We're going to pass that now. And the only reason we haven't passed it so far is the treatment protocols learnt by reservist doctors and nurses in Afghanistan about stopping blood flow has been working for the last 10 years in our NHS and saving lives. So we're about to pass that. And the reason why we're about to pass it is because loads of cops are giving up on the street, being proactive, as it would be called, getting out there, stopping and searching people. The losers from this latest weak, pusillanimous, headline-grabbing statement by the Commissioner and Deputy Assistant Commissioner Matt Twist, who I rate actually and should know better, know them both personally, is that more black kids will die and more black mothers will lose their children either to the knife or gun or to life imprisonment for the murders they've done.
Kevin, you've been at the sharp end. The vast majority of us don't understand what it's like to try and arrest somebody who does not want to be arrested. How often is the decision to arrest taken in a calm, composed situation? How often is it actually in a fevered moment where there's a threat of violence hanging in the air? Is it impossible to talk about a typical scenario?
Well, you're right. It is very difficult. A decision to arrest for a set-piece murder situation, an armed robber when you're a specialist squad, is very different to being an officer on the street working on a plainclothes crime squad or turning up an incident. The decision to arrest is often made in fractions of a second with a hostile crowd around you and people fighting you. It's right that officers should consider their use of force and should be able to justify it. What concerns me here is that the Metropolitan Police have served up 44 points for which Defence Counsel can trip officers up at the Old Bailey when they're cross-examining them a year later, or for which officers can be tripped up or caught out by the Independent Office for Police Conduct because they haven't dotted one of the I's or crossed one of the T's. Because some of these questions actually require several paragraphs to answer them if you're going to write down your reason. And I do wonder why they've gone this way, because what they should say is this. The act of arresting someone is the most dangerous time for a police officer and indeed for the person being arrested. It is therefore prudent in virtually all cases to say, if they're being nice, for your safety and mine, I am going to apply handcuffs to you. Please put your hands out. Or alternatively, screaming, get on the floor, get on the floor. The point is, when someone is handcuffed, the likelihood of police having to do violence to them is much reduced. The likelihood of the police officer being injured is much reduced. There should be a blanket statement that the normal position for someone being arrested is they should be handcuffed. And I'll tell you why. I learnt very early on in the police that when a call came over the radio from a constable on the street, can you send the van police to somewhere? I've just arrested someone. We all turned our police cars round and slowly moved in the direction of that officer, because we all knew that the moment of taking someone's liberty away is the moment when they're most likely to fight the officer and the officer is most likely to have to fight them back. The fact is, applying handcuffs to someone is sensible. And also, in the act of stopping and searching someone, if you stop them and say, look, you're being stopped because of this reason and that reason in this particular area, I am going to search you. For your safety and mine, I want to apply handcuffs, please. And the rationale behind that is this. When you start to search someone, you of course will be looking into their pockets, looking down, and you're close to them. That is the moment when someone can strike you from above or stab you. If that person is already handcuffed, you can search them in a sensible, nice, not that being stopped and searched is nice, but a sensible, measured and stable situation. This decision-making statement by the current commissioner is just part of the weak, vacillating statement she keeps making at the moment, which is losing public confidence. Never mind all these other issues which are going on in policing. People are not confident in a weak police leader, and also her own officers are losing, if you like, their own confidence on the street. Very disappointing.
Kevin, we have to leave it there, but you've brought us a fascinating perspective of what life is like on the ground for police officers right now in London and potentially in time elsewhere as well. Kevin Hurley, thanks very much. Well, tonight it looks like Poland's decision to hang tough in the face of violent attempts by illegal migrants to enter its territory has worked. Hundreds of migrants who travelled to neighbouring Belarus in the hope of getting into Western Europe via the Polish border are now going home. Iraq has begun flights to repatriate its nationals from the Belarusian capital, Minsk, the very airport to which they'd flown, in the hope of beginning new lives in the West. An Iraqi Foreign Ministry spokesman said that 571 Iraqis were ready to return to their country of origin voluntarily. Over the past fortnight, the Polish army and police, 15,000 of them, have succeeded in stopping migrants, mainly men from the Middle East, from getting across its 250-mile-long frontier. They've been supported by British Army Royal Engineers. At one stage, it looked as if the international community would apply pressure on Warsaw to open the gates because of a looming humanitarian crisis, particularly once Western media outlets began focusing on the women and children who had gathered on the border in pretty grim conditions. But then the migrants seemed to lose patience and their temper. Earlier this week, they began attacking Polish border guards with missiles and were in turn forced back by water cannon and tear gas. Any hope that politicians in Warsaw would now relent in the face of such violence disappeared, and today, proof perhaps that the futility of waiting at the border has become apparent to many of the migrants. It's not clear whether other countries will follow Iraq's lead and lay on flights to get their nationals home, but it does seem like a development of some significance. Let's turn to George Byzinski, a Polish analyst and commentator. George, welcome again to GB News. We appreciate your time. How significant a development is this, do you think, the fact that the Iraqis are flying their people back home?
Good evening. I strongly hope that this issue may be resolved soon, that Lukashenko came to his senses and he realized that the trick has failed. But we do not have yet reasons to celebrate. There is still a crisis going on. There is at least between 5,000 to 15,000 migrants scattered around the border and in Minsk. So the crisis can still be fueled. I watched a program on a Russian television where they discussed what happened during the crisis. And they said that it was not expected that Poland would have acted so swiftly, so decisively and effectively. I could remind you that Poland introduced a state of emergency at the border straight away when the crisis began. Journalists were not allowed. Organizations claiming to welcome all the refugees were not allowed to come in. This helped to stabilize the situation and have it under control. There are new camps opened in Grodno, for example, in Belarus, where many of the migrants have been moved. This plane to Iraq is a very good first step, but that's only about 400 people that returned. Everybody else has to be returned if they do not have a chance to seek refuge. The message from Britain, from global Britain, was really appreciated, that the UK does not forget about Europe. Ben Wallace, Secretary of State for Defence, visited Poland just yesterday. The Royal British Engineers were sent in a small number, but it was a strong message of support to Poland and Europe. And the message from Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, was also very clear. We do not want that hybrid warfare here. We could also hear a strong message against Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline being built by Russia and Germany, which may be used in the future as an energy weapon. So it seems that Poland held the line, at least for now.
Held the line in spectacular fashion at the Kuznica crossing earlier this week, George. I just wonder how important those images were, which were beamed around the world, of migrants lobbing poles and logs and rocks at the lines of Polish soldiers and riot police as well, but also within Poland more directly, within Warsaw itself, indeed, politicians who might have been thinking that maybe they were coming under some pressure to release the humanitarian crisis that was gathering on the other side of the border. Maybe it was time to open the gates and let people through, but they couldn't possibly do that once they'd seen images of their own soldiers being attacked pretty violently.
Yes, certainly. It almost seemed as some sort of a charade. Migrants were pushed to the border, especially women and children. Photographs were being taken, it was supposed to seem that they all need support, but the reality was much different. A lot of the migrants were violent and dangerous, and clearly, if you're throwing rocks at the border force and throwing stun grenades that were provided to many of the migrants by the Belarusian border forces, allegedly, you're not sending a message that you're that peaceful refugee that wants to move to Europe. So the international media and large were not fooled and saw that this was just a trick. The European Union, surprisingly, was very united. There was a strong message from G7 and, well, also from the European Union of the need to protect the Polish border, although the EU only offered to pay for 2% of a wall to be built. And a wall may have to be built for the future if the Belarusian regime has any other tricks and strategies to disrupt and divide Europe.
Zinsky, appreciate your time as ever. Thanks for joining us. Thanks a lot. Now, there's said to be growing optimism at the Home Office that Albania will agree to act as a third-party processing centre for migrants who illegally cross the Channel to enter Britain. The idea has been around for a while and dismissed by some as unrealistic, but it is the alternative options that increasingly appear unworkable. In particular, the plan to use jet skis to turn back dinghies in the Channel is believed to have been dropped now by Whitehall, and so the Balkan route seems to be back in favour. It's reported that an Anglo-Albanian agreement could be sealed soon, potentially even within days. If agreed, it would see arrivals on British beaches taken to Albania within 7 days for offshore processing. The scheme promises to be expensive in the short term. Officials are said to be working on the basis of £100,000 per migrant, but in the long term it would save the country millions, in theory at least, as the deterrent effect kicks in. That assumes many migrants who want to come to the UK will not attempt the journey if they know their asylum application will be processed while they wait in Albania. Well, meanwhile, the pressure on the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, continues to grow. This week, for the second week running, more than 1,000 migrants crossed the Channel in a single day. It was once thought no migrants could cross in dinghies in November. Now, huge numbers are doing precisely that. Joining me is Claire Purcell, a former special advisor to the then Immigration Minister. Claire, thanks so much for your time. We do appreciate it. We're focusing heavily this evening on migration. There was Poland, we were just discussing it, but actually the situation much closer to home. I wonder, when you were advising an immigration minister a year or two ago, the idea of 1,000 migrants crossing the Channel in boats in November, I'm guessing it would have been pretty unthinkable then.
Yes, it would. You expect those numbers during the summer months where the weather is better, the visibility is better, but certainly not in October, November, December. And I think that we are looking at these numbers continuing to rise without a solution coming to mind.
Well, no solution that's workable or practicable coming to mind. And I mean, we've discussed over weeks this idea of turning back boats mid-channel, perhaps using jet skis, what legal provisions would need to be written into law to protect border force officials who potentially could see someone drown as a consequence of their actions. And it comes as a surprise to nobody if the reports are to be believed that actually that's an idea that's been tossed in the bin as potentially unworkable. So there is a sense that the Home Office is now thrashing around a little bit and looking at alternatives, an alternative. And the most obvious one remains, I guess, using a third-party nation to do this for us.
This idea has been around for some time, and it's always based upon the Australian model, which is held up as you know, a shining light in how to deal with offshore asylum processing. But that has been incredibly expensive. It was set up in 2012, but no one's been sent over to the island of Papua New Guinea since 2014. It's run into tens of billions of Australian dollars to just keep the scheme running. And in fact, the treatment of the individuals in that detention centre has been so bad, the Supreme Court in Papua New Guinea forced the Australian government to pay 70 million Australian dollars in compensation. So it's proved to be unworkable, very, very expensive, and is actually due to end at the end of this year. So it's not the answer that everybody hoped. Now, there's nothing wrong with looking at a solution like that, but as long as you can understand that process hasn't worked, what are you going to do, rather than saying, oh, well, it's okay because, you know, another EU country might take them. And I think we've seen today that the Albanian Minister for Europe has actually said there is no agreement in place.
But Claire, if the French won't play ball, and it doesn't look like they're prepared to do that right now, the brute reality of the statistics of the graphs, you know, if we get the same increase that we've had this year, at least three times as many Channel migrants compared to the previous year, and there's no indication that any of the demographic pressures are going to release or decline, then you're looking potentially at maybe, I don't know, 50,000, 75,000 migrants next year. The year after that, who knows? So this is a crisis in the making, and you can't just hope it's going to go away.
No, you can't hope it's going to go away. I think history has told us that that isn't going to happen. There are several things that need to be taken into account. Is that you do have Brexit, and I speak as a Brexiteer before anybody starts to get upset. But one of the consequences of that is that we lost all the agreements with EU member states to return people to their country of origin or a country that they have passed through and claimed asylum. So those agreements need to be renegotiated. Now, why hasn't that happened? That should have been top of the list. They should have been doing it right from the start. We know that Brexit has been coming. We knew when the end date was, so that should have been in place. But also the Home Office really does need to sort out the asylum application backlog that it has. When I was at the Home Office, we were staggered at the backlog then. I think it's probably about 2 or 3 times as bad now. I don't know what the solution to that is. They need to have more people making decisions. Those decisions need to be quicker. But the returns process needs to be the end stop. And if that doesn't work, then any processing in the world isn't going to alleviate it.
This week, just how tricky it is to get that processing right, isn't it? If somebody's pretending, for instance, to be a Christian whilst still professing a very different belief. Claire Purcell, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. Well, a setback to the Prime Minister's levelling up agenda today, in the eyes of his critics at least, as the eastern leg of the High Speed 2 rail plan from the East Midlands up to Leeds was scrapped. Ministers promised there'll be improved services elsewhere, but it's left many in parts of the north feeling betrayed. Let's turn to Richard Holden, the Conservative MP for North West Durham. Richard Holden, thanks so much for your time. Betrayed, or just accepting that actually there were strong arguments for doing things differently?
I think the latter in this case, actually, Colin. I think there's been a real massive amount of cash here being pumped into that, not just in terms of speed, but also in terms of capacity, actually. We're talking huge amounts of money, huge numbers of new trains, and also, over 100 miles of new railway. the East Coast Main Line, which serves the northeast of England, was built in 1850. This will be the biggest investment since that. And, I'm really in favour of what we've seen today. But what I don't want to miss out on, and this is what I think has been too much the case in recent years, is seeing that intercity expenditure and all of that extra resources to that, rather than for the regional services, which will really help level up communities like mine in Northwest Durham.
In a sense, Richard, though, I mean, Durham's sitting pretty. I mean, I'm sure you'll argue the case against what I'm about to say, but, there's Durham. It's not a huge place. I know you don't represent the city of Durham, but, if you're in Durham, for instance, there you are. You're on the East Coast line. You can whip down to London fairly rapidly. But I think of my home city of Bradford, was expecting to get a new station, was expecting to be part of a high-speed Trans-Pennine route linking the big cities along that Pennine corridor. That could have been a massive engine for economic growth. And I'd say more than that, actually. If you look at some of the problems of a big city like Bradford around social cohesion, the idea of people being able to move, to pursue learning opportunities, find work, that's really important. And that's not now happening, at least not for Bradford.
Well, I think on Bradford specifically, you're seeing the electrification of the line to Leeds, which is going to reduce in half the journey time there. For somewhere like where I represent in Northwest Durham, Consett, Crook, the former steel towns, the former pit villages, we have no train line at all at the moment. And I think this investment is massive in helping to deliver the big central connectivity, that spine up the centre of the country and cutting through the Pennines as well. What I want to see, though, and this is probably something which Bradford's been waiting for forever, and somewhere like Northwest Durham's been waiting for as well, is some of those regional services which actually help link people to education and jobs, just exactly what you've been talking about, Colin.
Richard, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Richard Holden.
Thank you.
Now, after the break, I'm going to be talking to Dr. Nizar Ali, a man who's supported many Christian converts from Islam, about how widespread it is for those conversions sometimes to be spurious.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, now, Meghan Markle is back on TV in America, just back, in fact, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, so it's literally just being broadcast now in the US. A big sit-down interview with a comedian called Ellen DeGeneres. I know we're meant to nod sympathetically when the Duke and Duchess, the Duke or Duchess of Sussex, tell us about their truth. We must think them brave to share their stories of suffering from their 14-bedroom Californian mansion. But theirs is a particular kind of confected courage, I would say, and I'm going to try and provide you with some proof tonight. Because although the Meghan Markle interview will secure global coverage, even though there are apparently no bombshells, another story went almost unnoticed today. Scarcely a single newspaper mentioned it, and it's a story of unimaginable mental bravery that the Sussexes, for all their advocacy of let it all hang out psychobabble, would do well to learn from. 30 years ago today, a British man was released from a tiny room where he'd spent almost 5 years in solitary confinement, chained night and day to a radiator. There was no natural light, barely enough room to walk around, no books, no newspapers, no music, no company, no smartphone. There was some variety. Now and again he was tortured. Once or twice he was subjected to a mock execution. Subsequently, he said he was never quite sure whether he was going to be shot or beheaded. The next time you hear the Sussexes talk about the pain of isolation, call to mind the image of Terry Waite, freed exactly 3 decades ago today after spending 1,763 days in captivity. He'd gone to Lebanon to negotiate the release of other hostages and ended up becoming one himself. The next time you hear the Sussexes warbling on about themselves, filling the airwaves with their characteristic brand of self-pitying cant, call to mind these words, the words of Terry Waite after his release from a living hell. Quote, "It wasn't an exactly or an entirely pleasant 5 years, but one survived it." For some, this type of reserve and self-restraint belongs to the dark ages of mental health, all that repressed anger and suppressed suffering. But what critics of the fabled British stiff upper lip always overlook is this. In those pithy words lies the secret of Terry Waite's survival. Other hostages in neighbouring cells went mad, had nervous breakdowns. He didn't. And in the almost comically stoical understatement of those words, we begin to see how and why. Because Terry Waite, a giant of a man physically, was also a giant of a man mentally. In those words, I'll read them again for you. It wasn't an entirely pleasant 5 years, but one survived it. He shows how he hadn't been broken. He could make light of his ordeal, even gently mock his captors. They may have held his body, but he kept control of his spirit. How on earth did he do it? Well, he lived inside his mind. He recited the Psalms. Afterwards, he said, "Good language, like good music, has the ability to breathe harmony into the soul." He composed poems and he memorised them. He'd been no good at maths at school, but made himself do sums in his head. He couldn't write anywhere. He did physical exercise insofar as that was possible and tried to retain some shred of dignity. He was given a pair of pyjamas to wear, and at night he would put his trousers beneath his mattress to press them so he could stay smart. Terry Waite had been sent on his mission to Lebanon by the Church of England, whose supreme head, you'll know, is Prince Harry's godmother, the Queen. Grandmother, I should say. And it was partly that Christian perspective that gave him the historical long view that comes from feeling part of a 2,000-year-old story. As he slumped, chained to the wall, he comforted himself with the thought that some early Christian slaves had lived their entire lives in chains. He's still with us, by the way. He's 82 and still smiling, that big toothy grin of his. He lived those 1,763 days in captivity by a code. No regret, no self-pity, no over-sentimentality. The precise opposite of how the Sussexes live their very public lives. Harry and Meghan peddle regrets. They wallow in self-pity and they have commercialised sentimentality. Right now in America, millions of people are hanging on every syrupy word of Meghan's latest interview. So many words that reveal so very little. And none of those words will make as much sense and bear out as much truth as the handful uttered by Terry Waite on his release 30 years ago today. God bless him. That's tonight's Brazier Angle. Joining me now, Dr. Michael Nizar Ali, the former Bishop of Rochester, who knew, and I dare say still knows, Terry Waite. Dr. Nizar Ali, thanks so much for joining us. Your thoughts today?
Yes, it's good to see you. Well, Terry actually stands as a symbol, a representative of many who are suffering for justice, for freedom for people, and we salute them all. Many of them, their names will never be known, but they need to be remembered also at this time.
How much do you think, if at all, we are losing the ability in life to hear that still small voice of calm that Terry Waite could hear and hang on to?
Well, sometimes, as with the prophet Elijah, it takes extreme circumstances to hear that voice. I was talking to Tom Holland, the historian, last night, and he was saying how it had been visiting Sinjar in Iraq after it had been recaptured from ISIS. And he saw the place where they had crucified the men. And it was that which awoke him to how Christianity had completely changed the Roman Empire, where, of course, for Rome, crucifixion was a way of inflicting a degrading punishment of the kind of torture that's unimaginable for us on people. And that kind of gratuitous cruelty, I'm sure that Terry and other hostages experienced that themselves, that it was the coming of the Christian faith to the Roman Empire that changed all of that.
For anybody who has the time to read Tom Holland's book, Dominion, it's a wonderful read and well worth their time, I would suggest. Michael Nizar Ali, can I break this interview into two halves? That's the first half, and the second half is this, and it's focused on the events in Liverpool, the recent bloody events in Liverpool, which I think you know we were going to broach with you. There are people who say it should fall to the church to weed out those whose religious conversion is not authentic, when it's spurious. To which I would say, no, it's not. It's impossible to fathom the bottom of somebody's soul. That's not the church's job. If somebody approaches them, yes, they can do a degree of trying to work out how sincere somebody's conversion is, but ultimately it's for the Home Office, it's for the secular authorities to make that determination. What say you?
Well, yes, that's true. But I think, first of all, there are many good reasons why people come to Christian faith in this country, people who may be asylum seekers or immigrants. I mean, they may be looking to anchor themselves in the spiritual home, as it were, the spiritual soil of the country in which they find themselves. They may have a spiritual nature which needs expression. They may have become alienated from the faith of their birth because of its drift to extremism. They may simply be looking for friendship. So there are good reasons. I think the key is discernment and preparation. So discernment about whether a request for instruction and baptism is genuine. So one obvious thing that can be noticed is whether this request has come after a claim has been rejected. In the case of this man in Liverpool, Ahmad, he approached the church for conversion, I understand, after his claim for asylum had been rejected. Well, that should immediately have alerted those dealing with him that there may be opportunism here. So discernment is very important. And then even when that shows that somebody may well be genuine, there is then preparation, careful preparation, the requirement that someone should be a member of a congregation for a while before they are supported in terms of any application. But yes, in the end, the church cannot second guess the state. That it is important for Christians to be kind and compassionate to everyone, to provide aid and advice, and indeed contribute to the debate on immigration, and to make suggestions and to request revision of things that appear unjust. But in the end, the church is not equipped to make a decision about individual cases. That has to be left to the state.
You have literally 30 seconds left. I just wonder, do you worry a little bit, perhaps, that I know through your work with, I think it's the Barnabas Trust, isn't it? You've worked with many Muslims who've converted to Christianity and run the risk of a persecution, to put it kindly, as apostates. Do you worry perhaps a little bit that there may be less understanding now for people like that?
Yes, I mean, that's the problem, that the genuine cases, and there are many, I mean, in the plural society, Colin, people are going to cross these boundaries. They're going to change their faith from one faith to another, or to no faith. And we must make sure that people have that freedom to do so in this country, because they don't in many other countries. One sort of bad case shouldn't, as it were, tarnish the reputations of many other genuine people who come to Christian faith or who change their faith from one to another.
Hard cases make bad law, as they say. Dr. Nizar Ali. Michael, thanks so much for your time. Thank you very much. After the break, Meghan's given another softball interview. We've watched it, so you don't have to. We'll be talking to Angela Levin about that.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Duchess of Sussex has this hour been giving another high-profile TV interview. The one with Oprah Winfrey 8 months ago delivered a salvo of bombshells at the pretty frontage of Buckingham Palace, you'll remember. This interview with the comedian Ellen DeGeneres is a rather more muted affair. In one of the more bizarre parts of her appearance, she was sent off to meet, I'm just reading this for the first time, some mere mortals, with Ellen whispering in her ear. Have a look.
Spicy. Okay. Let me try something real hot. Let me try something real hot. Okay. Mommy wants some heat. Mommy wants some heat. There you go. Like a chipmunk. This is what I do for my kids to cheer them up. This is what I do for my kids to cheer them up. I sing a little song. I sing a little song. I'm a kitten. I'm a kitten. Mew, mew, mew. You're a kitten. You're a kitten. Kwame, you sing it too.
Kwame, yeah, mew, 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 mew,
See, it's what you could have been watching. The royal author and commentator Angela Levin joins me now. If you can... Angela, did you enjoy that?
Oh, God, you know, I think it's one of the worst things I have ever seen in my entire life. It's sort of how low can you go, right? Now, let me just fill in that little bit of extract that we saw. It's about Ellen telling Meghan that she has to listen to her and do absolutely what she says. So Meghan walks away and she's got an earphone and she's got a helper who goes up and says, look, I'm Meghan Markle's one of her staff, but you've got to pretend you don't know who she is. You've got to treat her like every normal person. So Meghan comes up and she's told to touch her elbow if she knows she can hear, touch her nose, and then bend right down. So she sort of squats right down, which looks absolutely disgusting. She then goes over to this stool and touches everything and says silly things like we've seen. But she also says, oh, look, healing things. I have healing power. And she says, say it again, I have healing power. And she's lovely, lovely day, as if she's actually off her head. And what is interesting about that is that the people there are stall holders, not wealthy, trying to get some money. And it made me think, Meghan and Harry say, we believe in compassion for those you know and those you don't know. Well, those people are made a mockery of. And Meghan was made a mockery of. I'm astonished she did it. But that's her choice. But those stallholders were looking, they didn't know what to say, they didn't know what to do with this woman behaving abominably. It was actually disgraceful.
Angela, is the royal institution, is the monarchy made a mockery of by association?
Well, of course, because she's still a member of the royal family, although not a working member of the royal family. These things rub off, don't they? I mean, if you're friendly with someone who behaves abominably, people think that actually, can they trust you? This was shocking. The other one, which was her telling in minute detail about a car that broke down when she was trying to get acting jobs and she had to crawl through the back. Right, but she went into amazing detail. Now, this happened about 16 years ago when she was very young. And that struck me that how come she can remember that in great detail, but she can't remember talking to an aide over a very serious matter over several months about finding freedom, which was very important to her and very important to Harry. So it is so crass. And she'd got a cheer when she said that it was very important to her and she was going to fight as very hard to get everyone to be paid when they had a child. Well, that was perfectly sane, that was perfectly all right. But with all this rubbish around it, it was lost because what this was Meghan has lots of cameos of herself. We see it all the time. 1 minute she's very depressed, the next minute she's very jolly, next minute she's a guru, and so on. You know, she's got a whole range of them. That's fine, actresses can do that. But this one lets her down. I wouldn't say that without thinking that it lets her down enormously. You can't have any respect for somebody who behaves like that.
On the other hand, Angela, we haven't got very long left, but I mean, when the news emerged at the start of this week, I think maybe it was sooner, you'll know better than I, that there was going to be another interview, the first big sit-down TV interview with somebody quite well known in America since Oprah Winfrey. They were probably handing out the tin hats at Buckingham Palace, but actually they didn't need to because there are no, so far as we know, there are no bombshells here.
Well, I haven't seen it all because it's still running, but there weren't any up to now. But I think it's hiding under the table type of thing where you think, I just can't bear this. This is
through the fingers. Through the fingers.
Do this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we've seen that before. You know, the royals have done that from time to time. It's a royal knockout was one of those moments.
This is much worse than it's a royal knockout.
Wow. Angela,
really?
It's very good to talk to you, as always. Angela Levin there with her view on that interview that's just still happening now, probably, between Meghan Markle and Ellen DeGeneres. Do stay with us, won't you? Now, a Church of England school in London has decided to change the names of some of its houses. From now on, house points handed out to pupils at Holy Trinity Church of England Primary School in Richmond upon Thames will not go to members, for instance, of Winston Churchill House or the house named after Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling. You know, that the one who's not been invited to the big reunion, well, you know why. As part of Black History Month, they were both cancelled and replaced with the footballer Marcus Rashford and the Caribbean nurse who worked in the Crimea, Mary Seacole. The decision taken last month came to light today in the Daily Mail. Let's pore over it with Ella Whelan of Spiked. Ella, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Do appreciate it. I mean, if somebody at the Daily Mail had sat down at their computer and could have tapped out their ideal the world's gone mad story, this is quite close to the acme.
Yeah, these things tend to be even too good to parody. It's a little bit ridiculous. I mean, especially in relation to this story, is the fact that the school is sticking with the claim that this change of name to rename things in relation to Rashford and Seacole came from the kids. And we're talking about primary school. So the idea that primary school children had a open discussion about the rights and wrongs of J.K. Rowling's views on gender and mused upon it, and in between lunch and break time came up with the idea of renaming it a Marcus Rashford Hall is a little bit ridiculous. But it's indicative of the state of play of much of the culture wars, as they're called these days, in that it does end up being these really rather ridiculous things that are beyond parody, but that are symptomatic of a larger trend. There's nothing wrong with renaming a building. There's certainly nothing wrong with renaming kids' school buildings after some very high-profile, influential, and figures that we should admire, like Marcus Rashford or indeed Mary Seacole. But what's happening here is not just an innocent, lick of paint and a change of plaque on a school building. It's part of a wider censorious mood, particularly in education as it happens, to try and whitewash out things that are difficult to talk about, or that, essentially that schools seem to be embarrassed about. So in this case, it was quite obvious that the school didn't want to have the flack from external sources of, being told off for having a building named after Churchill or Rowling, despite one being a historical figure and another being a very famous children's author. And so took what seems to be rather cowardly decision of using kids as a stage army to suggest that they have just renamed it. And, why is this a problem? Why should we care? Well, in some ways, maybe we shouldn't. But actually, this is happening across the board in relation to the whitewashing of history, or the removal of history for fear of causing offence in university buildings, in street names, in cities. And what that really displays is a kind of, I think, a fragility among a certain set of people to not be able to engage with history and have open debates about stuff, and instead try and paint it over with new names, which is a little pathetic.
As you say, it's a particular problem to your mind, and I agree with you, in education, but in corporate Britain too, the Western world corporately, there is this democratic deficit, that your sense of being powerless, unable to do anything about it. I mean, I was just going to move this on to the great pronoun debate situation in France. We probably haven't got time to talk about now around pronouns, but I got my first email 2-3 days ago where somebody had put their preferred pronouns, and it was a little bit arresting. But I just wondered how much they'd been permitted to have a view on that. And, when these highly credentialed peoples in HR departments or corporate affairs decide this is what we will do they really take account of the views of the cleaners and the security guards and the many, many people who make up their institutions?
Well, it's a really important point, and I think actually it's been highlighted by the Stephen Nolan podcast on Stonewall that everyone's still talking about, which really highlighted the fact that things like pronouns, most of us would look at it and think, well, I think, whatever floats your boat, I'm not going to engage in that kind of stuff because I care quite a lot about language and its meaning, being a literature student. But the thing that the Stephen Nolan podcast really brought to light was the fact that this thing, gender ideology, these new ideas about pronouns, should be up for debate. They are not just, it's not fact like the sky is blue and the grass is green.
Ella, I'm so sorry. I went on too long and I've run out of time. I do appreciate yours, though. Dan Wootton's next. Stand by.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The weather stays largely cloudy and windy for most of us during the next 24 hours. It will also be very mild. All these things are connected. A westerly breeze at the moment means that we're importing a lot of cloud, some outbreaks of rain as well, especially in the west and the far north, and it is staying on the mild side. These weather fronts providing a focus for the rain.